And welcome back to the last video for chapter 16 that we're going to do. So infectious diseases can be not inquired, you can inquire about anything, but acquired in many ways. So there are different transmission pathways. The first is direct contact. And you can see that here. Physical contact from person to person, kissing, holding hands, playing, from mother to infant, shaking hands, anything like that is direct contact. Indirect contact can be through what we call fomites. So this is where a pathogen moves from the infected to some item. This could be a Kleenex, it could be a hand towel, it could be a doorknob. Any of those are called fomites because they're inanimate objects, but they can be contaminated. We can have vehicle transmission. So vehicles are things that the pathogen moves through to get to their host. So water and food are vehicles of transmission. Air can actually be a vehicle of transmission. Vector transmission occurs when you have a vector like an insect or a, what was I going to say? Arthropod. So like a tick or a mite that transmits a disease. So a lot of times these are mechanical, which we talked about in, what was it, chapter, I want to say, no, 5, I think we talked about mechanical vectors and biological vectors. I added those in because when we talk about different eukaryotic organisms, a lot of times they are mechanically vectored or biologically vectored. So I talk about them there, but I'm reminding you again, we have these mechanical vectors are arthropods that carry a pathogen from one host to another without being infected. So think of a fly that lands on a pile of poop and then carries E. coli from the poop to your hamburger. A biological vector is one in which the organism replicates inside the host, so it uses that host as part of its life cycle. So this would be like the Anopheles mosquito carrying malaria. It has a sexual phase for that protozoan inside the mosquito, and then it's transmitted to the human, and the human is the asexual carrier. So here you can see mechanical transmission, and it's kind of funny because they use the exact same thing. So here's a pile of poop, and then the fly lands on your sandwich, and then you eat it. And here is malaria. So here we have a mosquito eating from an individual who is ill. In this case, the mosquito is biting someone who's not ill, but the mosquito itself is infected. It takes a blood meal and it sends the larva into the individual. The individual becomes sick, and then another mosquito comes along and takes a blood meal and takes in those protozoans, and those protozoans can now replicate sexually inside of the mosquito. Diseases can be called communicable or non-communicable. A communicable disease is a disease that can be transmitted from one individual to another. So examples of communicable diseases: COVID-19, measles, chickenpox, the cold, influenza. Non-communicable diseases are not transmitted from one individual to another. In general, when you have a non-communicable disease, you're not going to be considered infectious to someone else. So tetanus, botulism, Why can't I think of it now? Bronchitis. That's non-communicable. Those are non-communicable types of diseases. When individuals are ill with an infectious communicable disease, they have to be isolated. So quarantining is isolating individuals who are infected so that that disease doesn't spread. So sometimes we quarantine, typically quarantining occurs when a disease is highly deadly or highly contagious and can cause a lot of damage. Social distancing is another mechanism of maintaining or of helping disease not spread. So social distancing occurs when you stay away from other individuals. You maintain a certain space between individuals to keep from getting infected. We have some diseases that are spread through the healthcare environment. These are known as healthcare associated or nosocomial infections. Nosocomial infections are infections acquired at the hospital, typically, or a healthcare facility. Typically, they are going to be considered secondary infections because you're already in the hospital for some reason. This can cause your immune system to have a lot of problems. So reservoirs for infection and nosocomial infections are things like other patients. So you have a lot of ill individuals. So those individuals can cause problems. Healthcare workers that don't wash their hands between patients. Even if healthcare workers do wash their hands, they can still, if they aren't taking proper precautions, they can still transmit infection on other surfaces. So like if you have someone in a healthcare environment filling water up and they take all of the water containers out together to fill them up and the containers themselves touch each other, that can actually transmit infection. You can also have infections transmitted through certain medical equipment, especially if the medical equipment is not sterilized. And then you have your own microbiota that can potentially cause damage due to your system already being immunocompromised. That is all I have in this chapter. So I'm going to end here. I'll post these videos. You have a wonderful day. Bye.